Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're getting ready to get started shortly. I'm trying to view. There we go. And you're on screen now.
Okay. So we're waiting. Are we waiting like how long? Maybe 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, another 2 minutes
10.
or so. It's 8:32 Jamaican time. Maybe people finishing up dinner. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're getting ready to get started shortly. Oh, we have to mute.
Testing. Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Is everyone hearing me? Can you hear me, Anne?
Yes, with
Okay.
just us three.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
okay, so we're going to get started, and let me just first thank everybody for coming this Good Thursday evening. We're here today. We're going to be talking about stress management and anxiety, and we're hopeful that the information will be useful and vital to everyone. We welcome your comments and your questions in the chat box. I see everybody's greetings. So thank you all. I'm going to, without further ado, just get started with introduction of our first speaker, and that is Ms. Anne Moody. Ms. Moody is going to be talking to us about stress management, and just a brief intro because she's lived quite a life, but we're just going to let you know that she's an outpatient therapist, a licensed associate clinical psychologist, and a master certified life coach. She earned her graduate degree in clinical psych with a concentration in marriage and family therapy. And she has 22 years experience working with children and their families. And most importantly, she's second generation Jamaican, born to Jamaican parents and living here in the States. Ms. Moody, we will turn over the floor to you at this time.
Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to introduce a presentation on stress management, and it will be a generalization of how to manage stress, but then I'll also present you with tips on handling stress during a pandemic. We also will have talks about negative behaviors and positive behaviors, good stress and bad stress. So that's what the presentation will be about. Let's see now. I am going to share my screen. Minimize. Okay. Can everyone see clearly?
No, I don't think you're sharing yet.
It's not showing?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, let me try it again. There we go.
Aha.
There we go.
That's the trick.
Okay, so here we go. Stress management and overview. What is stress? Stress is the body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. The body reacts to these changes with physical and mental and emotional responses. Stress is a normal part of life. You can experience stress from your environment, your body, your thoughts, even positive life changes such as acceptance of a new job, going to a new school, a new car can produce stress. There are different types of stressors. For instance, we have situations that are considered to be stress provoking are known as stressors. Stress is not always negative. It is simply the response of a person physically and mentally towards strenuous demands, such as positive stress. And some examples of positive stress are getting admitted into a college you wanted to go to, getting a promotion at work, passing an exam, planning a vacation, or moving to a new city. Holidays, preparing for the holidays, educational classes, things like that are positive stress. Stress motivates and energizes a person. It is short-term and within our coping abilities. It makes a person feel lively and stimulating and enhances one's performance. Then you have negative stress. Negative stress would be things like violence, harassment, health, pain, and death. Experiencing traumatic events, unemployment, sleep problems, poor academic performance, obesity. Those are some examples of negative stress. Dealing with, for children, dealing with bullying, dealing with traffic. If you have to be somewhere and there's a lot of traffic, those things are like negative stress. So negative stressors causes anxiety or concern, can be for short or long term. Individuals in most cases are unable to cope with negative stressors. It makes a person feel depressed and unpleasant. It leads to decreased performance and activities undertaken and affects a person physically and mentally. In most cases, a person can refrain from participating in world affairs. Here's some internal sources of stressors, such as fears of heights, flying on a plane, public speaking, talking or meeting with strangers, having repetitive thought patterns such as delusions or hallucinations, or upsetting thoughts, feeling tense about future events, such as an exam or job changes, awaiting a medical test report. Those are internal stressors. And then you have habitual behavior patterns. That's another type of stressor. These are being overworked, overscheduling, failing to be assertive, feeling nervous on trivial issues, failing to set and maintain healthy boundaries and relationships, getting aggressive easily, procrastinating works and tasks. These are some of the habitual behavior patterns that cause stress or which can lead to stress. So here are the stress responses. Everyone has heard of fight or flight, and even some other people may have heard of the freeze, but the most common ones are fight and flight. Well, we have a fourth one, which is flow, and I'm going to explain each one of them to you. The first one, fight, is a stress response. It's irritability, loss of temper, having a tantrum, being defensive, resisting, blaming someone, or complaining. So that's your fight response. So the fight response is not always literal, but anytime you are against, it's a fight response. The next one is flight. Flight is you could flee from danger or a stressor, and that would be avoidance. Anxiety, denying, distracting, those are flights. And then you have freeze. Now, as a stress response, sometimes you can freeze, which would be numbing or detachment, disassociating, ignoring, and giving up easily. If you can imagine being faced with, let's say, maybe an angry dog, and the dog seems aggressive. and you're afraid to run because you know if you run, the dog would run after you. So that would be fight. That would be flight. But for some people, they know or they don't know what to do and they would just freeze. So that's a response to the stress, freezing, not moving, not running away. That's a freeze. And the last one is flow. Flow is the healthiest stress response out of all four. Flow is resilience. So when you're faced with a stressor, you easily adapt to it, or you try to find out more about it, or you have compassion. So for instance, if you are maybe in a road rage incident, driving a car, and someone is aggressive with you on the road, and instead of fighting with the person or just fleeing away from the person, you may inquire about what the problem is, why the person is so aggressive. So that would be the compassion and adapting to the aggressiveness and the curiosity because you're asking the question. So that is the healthiest stress response, and that's flow. So think of it as like going with the flow. Flow response. There's another, hold on a second. When we are experiencing flow, we are still experiencing a strong instinctive sense of urgency or intensity, but we are interpreting it in a more neutral way. So for example, as excitement rather than fear, or as wrath rather than anger. Here are some physical symptoms of stress. You can have low energy, headaches, upset stomach, which may include diarrhea or constipation. You can have aches and pains and tense muscles, chest pain, rapid heartbeat, insomnia, which would be lack of sleep, frequent colds and infections, because too much stress will lower your immune system. So frequent colds and infections, nervousness and shaking, cold or sweaty hands and or feet, dry mouth, difficulty swallowing, or grinding the teeth. There are some people who deal with stress a lot at night to the point where they cannot sleep well, and sometimes they will grind their teeth to deal with whatever thoughts that are stressing them out. So those are some physical symptoms of stress. It's not limited to this list, but this is what a lot of people experience when dealing with stress. Here are some emotional symptoms of stress. Easily agitated, frustrated, and moody, feeling overwhelmed or losing control, having difficulty relaxing, feeling bad about yourself, low self-esteem, lonely, depressed, or avoiding others. So these type of symptoms of stress have to do with your emotions and what you're feeling about what's going on with you. Cognitive symptoms of stress. So this has to do with a lot of ruminating thoughts of the mind. So if you have constant worry, racing thoughts, forgetfulness, disorganization, inability to focus, poor judgment, being pessimistic or seeing only the negative, those are signs of cognitive symptoms of stress. And here we have behavioral symptoms of stress. Behavioral symptoms would be the actions that are involved as a result of the stress. So changes in your appetite, eating too much or not enough, procrastinating and avoiding responsibilities, increased use of alcohol, drugs, or cigarettes, exhibiting more nervous behaviors such as nail biting, fidgeting, or pacing. So pacing back and forth is the behavioral symptom of stress as well. Some that I don't have listed here, but I have experienced in recent years is something called trichotillomania, which is a hair pulling disorder. And that's a behavioral symptom of stress as well. So, for instance, whenever someone is faced with a stressor that they cannot manage, they engage in hair pulling. It could be eyelashes and it can be on your head, but that's a behavioral symptom of stress. Here are some stressors that are common with teenagers. So working with teenagers, you can see a lot of these symptoms here. Like it could be family stress. A lot of teenagers deal with stress of peers. Their social life is everything. So that's usually a big stressor. Self-esteem issues or sexual stressors, trauma or violence. Some may have psychiatric stressors, medical illness, substance abuse, grief and loss, or depression and teen suicide. Facts about stress. Stress helps the body prepare to face problems and or danger. Symptoms can be both physical and psychological. Short-term stress can be helpful, but long-term stress is linked to various health problems. So the short-term stress would be preparing for an important exam. And it's helpful because that type of stressor, it forces you to be alert and to take the initiative to study and prepare. So that's a healthy and a helpful type of stress. And it's short term because you typically only experience that when you're preparing, and when the test is over, then you're done stressing over the test. We can prepare and manage stress by practicing some helpful tips. Okay, so now we have some unhealthy coping mechanisms for stress. So people tend to develop methods for coping with stress over time. A coping mechanism is a response that develops over time to help someone deal with the stress. Some coping mechanisms work as healthy tools for managing, and many others are unhealthy and can magnify the negative effects of stress instead of reducing them. So a few examples of harmful coping mechanisms could be drinking alcohol, excess, smoking, illicit drugs, gambling, excessive eating, and self-harming behaviors. Here's two examples of a stress scenario. This one is typically fit for a young person. You ask mom if you can go with friends on Saturday night, but she said you are still too young to drive in cars with other kids. Everyone else gets to go, but you don't. Some say lie to your mom and do it anyway. You don't know what to do. What options do you have? So that is something a teenager may go with because that's a issue with their social life and their peers. And here's a second example. You tried out to perform in a local band, but you didn't make it. The others thought you didn't play the drums good enough and that you did not sing well. Your dream is to be a part of the band, so now you're upset. How do you get over this and feel better? So those are some stressful scenarios, but that's typically geared towards a young person. And here are some healthy ways to manage stress. Therapy, spa day, exercise, music, hobby. Time management is a great stress reliever. Going out in nature, trying yoga and meditation. Here are 10 strategies for stress management. Use reframing, and reframing would involve changing how you view the situation or reframing it so that it can fit. It can be like a problem solving for yourself. So you want to reframe the problem that is stressing you out, changing how it from a negative to a positive. So you're going to reframe. You can improve your planning, which would be planning far ahead of time so that if you're up against any bumps in the road, you won't be stressed out. Learning relaxation skills that can involve deep breathing exercises or just exercising like taking a walk. Affirm your values. Use a signature strength. So if there's some strength that you have that has worked for you before, you can use that. If it worked before, it will work again. So use a signature strength that you have. Manage strength imbalance. Develop a forgiving style. Sometimes not forgiving can add a lot of stress onto your body because you don't get rid of it. It stays with you, and stress that is not released, it gets stored in the muscles of your body. So developing a forgiving style is good for you. And it's a great stress reliever because you forgive and you let go. Practice mindfulness. Express your gratitude. Use positive affirmation or write about something you enjoy. Also, dealing with stress during a pandemic. During the pandemic can be a lot more stressful because you are going through, you're viewing a lot of things on TV, such as news, and you're also viewing things on social media. So you're bombarded with all sorts of negative news, and it's just adding on to the stress. So what you would want to do, especially during a pandemic, is limit the amount of time that you spend watching negative news and the time that you spend on social media. If you notice, people will go on social media and on their timeline, they're bombarded with nothing but negative news. So you may want to limit contact with that to reduce the stress during a pandemic. Focus more on some positive stories to uplift you during the day, and disconnect from your phone and computer from time to time. So those are some ways to reduce stress levels. And that is the end of this presentation.
Okay, great. Wow, lots of information there. Okay. Thank you so much, Anne. That was very, very good. Very, very informative. A lot of reminders for us and lots of prompts to keep us on track. in these challenging times. We're going to move to our next presenter. Let me pull up our description here. Our next presenter is going to come on screen soon. And this is Mr. Ayinde Reed of Indie Heart and Mind Incorporated. And Mr. Reed is a master's graduate from Barry University in Florida and a licensed practitioner with specialties in mood, behavioral, substance, and dual diagnosis disorders, as well as mental and developmental disabilities. He has helped individuals in their journey toward wholeness for over 10 years, using methods that incorporate all aspects of life. Mr. Reed is originally from Tree Views, Red Hills, and St. Anne. So I'm going to turn it over. Inde, you're on mute right now, and it's a go.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Carlene. I appreciate that. I noticed how you stressed the tree views.
Tree views.
Awesome, awesome. Well, it is a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I really enjoyed listening to your presentation on stress. I think it's a very appropriate topic given all that we have all gone through, not just in Jamaica or the US, but all over the world, right? Stress with all that we've dealt with COVID. My reason for being here today is just to talk on a couple different topics as I get ready to present. The topics I'll be addressing, one will be psychosocial support for guidance counselors. The other topic essentially addresses identifying and responding to anxiety in youth. And last but not least, I will briefly touch on just grief support for counselors and families. So bear with me while I get my presentation up, and we will take it from there. Okay. So if you can all see my screen, the topic of the initial is psychosocial support for guidance counselors, and I coined it guiding others to a better life. One of the things in addressing psychosocial support for counselors, for parents, for anyone that is actually providing support, it has to be based centrally with consideration to cultural, language, educational literacy, and accessibility to the needs of those that are participating in the psychosocial aspect of life. It is vital to look at mental health education, and so helping those that you're engaging with to understand what it is they may be facing. As Ms. Moody talked about stress, right? There are things that are stressful that can affect mental health. And so being able to explain what that means is vital. You know, having worked in healthcare setting for many years, there were times when someone may have presented to a hospital setting and they were confused and they were just having difficulty relating. And immediately people would assume Alzheimer's or dementia or some form of mental health. And it wasn't until further investigation by the clinicians and so forth that they were able to determine that the person had a urinary tract infection, you know, that triggered what seemed to be a mental health issue. So it's important for those providing guidance to understand mental health, to educate themselves on mental health, but also to educate those that they may be supporting or guiding. Psychosocial education, also extremely vital. You find that even in the field of substance addiction, even within the field of just dealing with any major stressor, helping people to understand what the psychosocial aspect of that is and how that plays into their survival, their future, is instrumental. It's actually one of the first set of educational groups that someone goes through when they've gone through a major traumatic event or a major stressor. in the United States, a lot of individuals that get supported by psychosocial settings are those that are elderly, or those that may, I call them more mature, right? So they may have lost family members, or lost social supports, or lost access or independence to being able to do certain things. And they are in need of psychosocial education, but not just for the geriatric population, for all ages, from babe all the way to youth, all the way to adult. Every aspect of life, every individual in life can benefit from psychosocial education, teaching them about everything from activities of daily living to how to essentially dress for success if you are pursuing, a career, how to handle stressful situations in school settings. And so psychosocial education is a vital aspect of being able to provide psychosocial support to those in need. The next topic I want to talk about is support groups. There's nothing like getting people together in a group setting. Many of us that went through high school, we remember getting together for lunchtime and getting together for a sport. Yes, those were great opportunities to engage, but it was only in settings where we could share who we truly are. Only in settings where we could go below the surface did we truly find that support and that opportunity for healing. And so when you have trained professionals, trained counselors, or even parents that are motivated to impact their younger generation, or impact their family or any setting, it is vital to consider the concept of support groups, being able to gather individuals together with a singular purpose of discussing something that is affecting or pertinent to that group. And so the need for support groups is highly helpful and instrumental in helping people dealing with psychosocial issues. One, it gives them a platform not only to share with others, but also it gives them an opportunity to hear the perspective of others and to receive testimony, so to speak, experiences or hearing people overcome different situations that may be applicable to their own lives. So support groups is definitely a vital aspect of that. Social activities. Earlier I talked about, getting together for lunch and soccer, football, and being able to connect with others. Well, social activities is a vital aspect of a person's individual life. And when you can engage people socially, it kind of lifts them out of depressed moods or anxious moments. It's almost like a distraction, and it's a very powerful one. For any of you that followed, the very atrocious thing that occurred in Germany many years ago with what happened with Jewish people. And it was interesting that there were individual Jews that were able to stay alive because they were able to bring laughter or bring entertainment to their oppressors. And we've seen that through many different cultures. The Africans that were taken to Brazil, one of the things that they used to overcome was being able to get together and kind of practice their dances. Well, in doing that dance, they created what's considered capoeira, and it was a martial arts technique that allowed them to fend off some of their oppressors. We see the same things with the Maroons in Jamaica. Again, it wasn't until they were able to escape those settings, those plantation settings, and create these communities, these support groups, these social activities, create their own individual settings where they're able to rise up and, naturally, with that support system, with that collectiveness, and naturally the terrain, they were able to fend off the oppressors and create independence for my nation, the nation of Jamaica. So it is vital when you are seeking to provide support to others to understand what the psychosocial, and the answer is in the name. Psycho, referring to the mind, mente, okay, and social, and understanding how that plays in collectively with others. And last but not least, I want to talk about nutrition. So that is generally overlooked a lot of times when it comes to addressing the needs of others. And so it is important to understand diet, because diet can affect mood. We know there are studies that show that children that are struggling with autism with a gluten-free diet can see dramatic improvements from very young. But again, when I say gluten-free, a lot of times that's just ensuring that you're not giving them a lot of processed foods, just being conscious of what you're taking in. It's interesting, we've shifted as a world towards organic food, right? But growing up in the island of Jamaica, before food was being imported in, when we raised our own tomatoes, when we raised all our natural, that was organic, that was genuinely organic. And how we've shifted from that to, what looks appealing and what's pretty and what's more plump based upon, marketing. And so being conscious of how nutrition impacts the other areas is vital. Psychosocial support must include proper screening. It's impossible to try to help someone until you do a proper assessment, screening. So an initial screening, kind of understanding what the primary concerns are, the primary chief complaints as they use in the therapy field. What is the person, the first thing, the most important thing that is going on for them. And then doing a full psychosocial assessment. Psychosocial assessment meaning covering different aspects of a person's life, everything from the medication they take to where they go spiritually in terms of if they have any spiritual affiliation, what is their nutrition about, what are their resources about, what is their family supports. So all those things are instrumental in understanding what's going on. Planning, counseling intervention based on a counseling service plan. So developing a specific plan tailored to that individual. Last but not least in this topic, I want to talk about how vital it is for us to understand our own orientation. What does that mean? There are two ways that we can approach a stressful situation. And intrinsically, it's whether we have an external locus of control or an internal locus of control. And what I've done is I've included a tool at the bottom of this PowerPoint where you can go and kind of sort of do an assessment to see where you fall on that scale. An external locus of control is essentially the belief that one's behavior will not lead to valued reinforcement, meaning that whatever occurred outside of your control, okay, external, all right? Internal locus of control is more the concept of realizing that you had a part to play. You may need to be aware of how that affected you, or be aware of what you can do to not allow that stressful situation to swallow you up. And what do I mean by that? So it's one thing to understand that a situation occurred to you. It's another thing to feel, okay, am I helpless, or do I have the ability to overcome? And a lot of times that can be done through the support of others. Is there anything that I can learn from that situation? Is there any boundaries that I can develop in how I interact or deal with others? Is there anything that I can learn? Maybe I couldn't have done anything to help myself, but can I learn something to help someone else? And so all those things play into understanding and our ability to overcome and be successful in difficult situations. Knowing when extra help is needed. You don't need to be an expert to recognize when someone needs outside help. If you can tell a friend isn't doing well, they might need a greater network of support. What to say when you don't know what to say? If you're at a loss for words, I just wrote down a couple conversation guides for you to kind of engage that person. Seems like something not going on. Want to talk about it? I've noticed you've been down lately. What's going on? Sometimes it just requires a person to take the initiative to reach out and just to ask the question, or to engage that person, or just to be patient with them as they find the opportunity. A lot of times we are kind of trained in this world to be talkers and not listeners. We're trained to want our own way, but not necessarily have the patience to hear someone else out. So all those things are helpful with being able to address that. Now I'd like to shift to identifying and responding to anxiety in youth. I just want to say everyone experiences anxiety, and I'm positive that because of COVID, literally everybody in the world this past year has experienced some form of that. It's a very natural and important emotion. Nothing wrong with anxiety, but just like anything else, whenever it is done to the extreme, whenever it's exaggerated, you can have an unhealthy response. So being conscious of what's a normal response to a stressful situation and what's an exaggerated response. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, a good man, he's a pastor, he went through a very difficult time with the COVID situation, and it took him months to get over it. And what it did was it created within him this fear, this irrational fear, and it's been difficult for him to go back in front of the pulpit and preach. And this was a solid man of God, but that disorder, that thing affected him in a very different way. It took him to the brink of death. And so, part of that is him being able to overcome through therapy and support and working through. And there is freedom and there is victory. And we see that day by day as he improves. And so it's vital to be aware of anxiety and what the levels are where you're in terms of your experience. With the many changes and uncertainties facing a teenager, anxiety tends to hum like background noise. Okay, so for a teenager today, especially with all the things coming to them through the media, whether social media, whether regular media, whether the issues with their families and parents or their peers and their friends, there's so many different things that are coming at our teens today. And for some teenagers, it may become chronic. Okay, it means it's something that is consistently pursuant, it's consistently ongoing. They may get to an high-pitched state, affecting school attendance and performance. When you have a student that is resisting going to school, okay, there is something that is causing that. There's something that they're anxious about, and so it's important to recognize that and work with them to try to work through some of those situations. When left unchecked, anxiety, when left unchecked, can become something more extreme, panic attack, and can become a phobia. Panic attack is generally related to something specific. So when left unchecked, there are things that may occur on top of their anxiety that might trigger them. Some of us may hear about triggers when you talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, for men that might be in the military. But let me explain to you that foster kids or just general youth experience PTSD when they suffer sexual abuse, or they suffer bullying, or they suffer trauma in some form or fashion. And so it's vital to not negate that, not to undermine the feeling that they may be having. And so it is vital to recognize and be able to respond to that. Panic disorder is more common in girls than boys. It generally emerges in the younger years of their teenager development, generally between 15 and 19. It can be signified by intense panic, triggered by specific situations, as I mentioned, overwhelmed by an intense fear or discomfort, a sense of impending doom. All those things are key aspects of understanding panic disorders. Sometimes they may feel like they're going crazy. I also mentioned phobias. Many fears of younger children are generally mild. Scared of the dark, scared of monsters, okay? However, teenagers' phobic fears tend to involve their school. It affects their grades, it affects their social ability to connect with others. It connects their performance in terms of physical activity. All those things are results of anxiety being left unchecked. And sadly, more destructively and more egregious is what's considered mood disorders. We may have heard of the term bipolar, okay? Major depressive disorder, major depression. These are mood disorders, and as my PowerPoint states, some teenagers with anxiety disorders can also develop mood disorders or eating disorders. The two that come to mind that are eating disorders are, bulimia, and anorexia. Those are very debilitating disorders that affect our youth. And so it's very important to be mindful of these things. Anxious teens may also use alcohol and drugs to self-medicate or self-soothe, develop rituals in an effort to reduce anxiety, rituals such as cutting. Not everyone that cuts is actually trying to kill themselves or commit suicide. Sometimes they're seeking attention, they're seeking help, and it's a way that they use. And so being conscious of that and being mindful of the behaviors in our teens is vital to detect when things are occurring. Now, those are heavy topics and they can be overwhelming, but how do we respond, you would say? Well, as I said before, don't discount someone's feelings. Everyone has a right to their feelings and it's valid to them. Now, it doesn't mean that their feeling and their fear all come together and it should be encouraged. No, yes, their feeling is valid, but helping them to understand that their fear or whatever it is that they may feel that is overwhelming is not guaranteed to occur. And there are ways to prevent and to protect yourself against those things. And so working with them, one, to validate their feelings, but then not re-emphasizing or encouraging the fear, helping them to understand that they can overcome those feelings of uneasiness about their body, their performance, their peer acceptance, and just general uncertainty regarding their development. So all those things are vital in identifying and responding to anxiety in youth. And one of the things that it is critical is that for us that are in the role of being a counselor or an overseer as a parent or support, when we sense these things or when we see these things, we need to ensure that youth gets evaluated because they may be at risk for harming themselves or others. And so they should be referred for emergency services. I believe back in Jamaica, instead of the US where it's 911, it's 119, I believe. I don't know if that's changed, but vitally important to seek help, and not just through law enforcement, but also through the group organizations or through school counselors or through supports that are within the community are all vital things to help. And last but not least, I'd like to shift to grief support. I think I'm coming down to my cutoff time, but I just wanted to touch on grief support for counselors and families. Grief is an all-consuming and mysterious phenomenon. It affects each and every person differently, different for everyone, and it's universal. We all experience grief in different ways. I know recently a friend of mine lost her husband, and in the same setting, another person that I know lost their parent, and they both were reacting to it differently. One who lost her husband, she was the caregiver for her husband for quite a few years. So yes, she is hurting with the loss, but at the same time, because she herself isn't in the best condition, she has had a load lifted from her, and so she's no longer a caregiver. And so in a way, she's feeling a relief, but at the same time, she's dealing with the loss of that partner that has been with her for so long. And so people experience different feelings of guilt and shame, or so many different feelings that they can experience while going through grief. And so it's important for us to be aware of that, not to put our feelings or what we think on someone else, but to be conscious that they may be responding or reacting to it differently. The other person that I mentioned, is more so than herself, is concerned about how to break it to her autistic child, not knowing if that's going to affect his development or his improvements and his behavior. And so there's so many facets being able to happen or come around when someone is addressing grief. And so it's important for us to be sensitive and mindful of that. Grief is a normal reaction to losing someone you love. Each person grieves differently, and there's no timeline for how long it takes before the hurt of loss lessens. No timeline. So not because some of us may be more resilient and we get over it much quicker, it is important to understand that everyone responds differently and to be able to be patient with individuals as they process through that in their own timing. I'd like to talk about DABDA, D-A-B-D-A. It's the 5 stages of grief. When grief was originally designed, they've kind of come up with 6 stages, but essentially the meat of it is the same. Denial, that's that initial stage where you can't believe, you can't accept what's occurred. You're in disbelief. Then there was anger. In the 6th stage version, they actually put anxiety right before anger. Then you have bargaining, where you're trying to figure it out. You're trying to make a deal. And then depression and acceptance. And so each person takes their own time, and it's vital to allow individuals to process through that in the time that is best appropriate for them. And last but not least, thank you and enough respect.
Wow, Mr. Reed. That was a very targeted, lots of information. Thank you so, so much. Very, very impressed with the presentations that we've had tonight. I would like to, we're coming at the end of our presentation, and I'm gonna check to see if there are any questions or additional comments. And then probably what I would like to ask both of you is, like, what is your top recommendation as we're going through these challenging times? You both have talked about how to address the challenges that we're going through and some of the things that we can do, some of the steps we can take. What's your favorite recommendation to people about how to cope or what they might do for self-care? And before you do that, I just want to say that I am looking at the comments, and Lady Anne, Mr. Benjamin, and also Miss Sandry Smith, they have like made you royalty, Anne. In thanking you, they've called you Lady Anne and thanked you for a lovely presentation. I'm seeing a lot of comments about how excellent the presentation was, how the information has been helpful. Let's see if there are any questions. Miss Hampson Sam says, all I have to say is this video is amazing. It's helpful, lovable. I can enjoy it and myself. All my stress is leaving my head, so this video is helping me to relax. Thanks, host, for this video. So, okay, wonderful and very informative. This is coming up when you are presenting, Mr. Reed. That would be okay. Wish more persons understood about the process of grief. Ms. Campbell Matherson has noted that grief is very, very important to know the stages and how to process. Let's see. Ms. Williams said, I always say everyone is an individual, hence we all deal with situations in different manners, which is, as you pointed out. Okay. So 2 great presentations, says Ms. Bailey, and Shandri Smith also said that they were very timely and a super job to both the presenters. So would you both just give us your favorite recommendation on how to manage stressful times, or what tips you might give somebody in response to stress and anxiety and all this stuff we're dealing with?
Well, I'll start by saying that, man, many of us have to give God thanks, because, you know, when we think our situation might be difficult, I was on a group with a group of people yesterday, and they struggle with a disorder called the Sjogren's disorder, and it affects their immune system. It affects, you know, their skin. And so some of the conversation was they're unable to go out during the day in the sun because they can only stay maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes before their their skin starts to literally heat up, and they have to constantly be drinking water, and their eyes are dry, and so, you know, helping them to tailor activities in the evening hours, or to address how they, you know, when they're isolated versus having an animal. So I just want to say to many of us that one is to thank God. The other thing is to recognize that our situation, there is hope. There's opportunities for change. And so it's important to not be isolated, to connect with others, to be able to talk about, as we talked about the support groups, being able to share with someone that you trust, someone that is a good shoulder to lean on, so to speak. Those are vital things. And as Miss Moody shared, you know, all the wonderful things that she shared, you know, it's vital just to lean on the supports. I'm grateful to be a part of JDTAN and all these groups that want to be a support. And so those are some things that I would suggest. Just take a load off, and really find someone to link up with and be able to walk through the situation.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Okay. And
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Allende. Really liked your informative presentation. One of the things that I would like to say is that it's very important that we often, during this time, and especially dealing with, there's a lot of anxiety, and then there's a lot of grief. So then there's trauma and secondary trauma going on. And we get into the habit of saying, well, let me know if you need something, or, you know, we have to just reach out to people, because not everyone, you know, some people may think they're a burden on you and may not want to bother you. But I think we should reach out, and, like, for the guidance counselors, check in with the students. Is everything okay? Or how is everything at home? Reach out.
mm-hmm.
And that's it. And then we definitely have to prioritize our self-care so that we can reach out whenever it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be there for our young people. They're going through something. Well, we haven't gone through this. Our parents and grandparents haven't gone through this. So it's all new to us, but we need to practice the self-care so that we can reach out to the younger ones.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. We did have a question for Sir Reed. Your royalty too. Everybody is royalty tonight. Sir Reed, Ms. Clark Jones has said, you spoke about the stages of grief, but what about those who are stuck? I guess somebody might be stuck in one of the stages. How do you help such a person who might be stuck in a stage of grief?
I think that's a wonderful question. And the reason why it's set up as a stage is because, as I mentioned, everyone is unique. Yes, people can get stuck in that stage. As a matter of fact, there's not a stage that someone can't get stuck in, whether it's the stages of development or the stages of grief. We know the stories that there are some people that just never grow up, right? They are still behaving like children, even though they may be 50 or 60 years old. So things can happen in our lives that can cause us not to be able to process through. And so if someone is in that situation, Ms. Moody mentioned it, it's the field that we study, a key thing is to seek out professional help with a therapist. You know, I just want to express, there's a difference between a counselor and a therapist, and a therapist generally should, you know, when you refer to it in the concept of the United States, it's referring to a licensed therapist, but generally counseling is a short-term approach with dealing with specific situations. Therapy is a more long-term, very in-depth approach at addressing particular issues, and most times they're chronic, but it can also be a short-term situation as well. So if someone is stuck at one of the stages, whether it be anger or anxiety or bargaining, having a therapist kind of help with that situation is strongly recommended. Having a counselor, somebody that can speak to that situation. But something else that might be available if someone doesn't have access to see a therapist is to seek out help within the community from community providers that can provide a buddy, somebody that may have walked through a similar situation and can share their experiences and help that person to kind of look outside the box. So those would be some intervention techniques I would suggest for someone that's sort of stuck, is they need a helping hand to kind of get them through that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, that there's no timeline. It's not for us to impose time frames on how someone deals with grief necessarily. And what our job is then to still be that ear and also give the hope that better is to come. Okay. Let's see. This has been, Ms. Lewis says, this has been an informative session. I was able to pinpoint some of the stress areas and how to address them. Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions, but I do see a lot of great presentations. Sir Reed, Lady Anne, you guys have provided us with some very vital information and food for thought as we're all going through this challenging time. I mean, 2020 was bad, and 2021, we might be going through PT, post-COVID distress. So let us continue to lift each other up and to do these steps and take these, self-care, take care of ourselves.
And Carlene, you didn't tell me that you were friends with the governor of Jamaica.
Who is that?
Well, because you anointed me sir, so I'm wondering if is the Queen of England or the governor or what? What kind of connection you have? Tell me.
No, it's not me. I was reading from the comments. That's what I'm saying. The comments have dubbed you and Anne. Anne is Lady Anne, and you are Sir Reed. I'm reading the comments. So, a lot of people are very grateful for the information. And I just want to take this time to thank you all so much for your attention and just for the feedback that you've given. It's very helpful to know that the information that the presenters put together is well received. Thank you all so much. And with that said, we will bid you a pleasant Thursday night and hope to see you again soon.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.